Wonderful. Okay, hello, everyone. Welcome to the April meeting of the Coordinated Entry Committee. As we get started, I just would like to ground us in kind of in our KCRHA theory of change and our land acknowledgement, as well as set a little context for this meeting. Then I'll have my colleague, Catherine Todd, do our roll call. And we have I have a change that I need to make to the agenda today, so we'll have the group vote on that as well, but we'll go ahead and get started. So the KCRHA theory of change says that if we create a homeless response system that centers people with lived experience of homelessness, then we will be able to respond to needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. And our land acknowledgement, we acknowledge that King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor this land and its people past and present, and we are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous people. And so a little bit of context for this meeting, as outlined in the King County Continuum of Care Charter, Coordinated Entry Committee will oversee policies and procedures related to coordinated entry in King County. CEC will be responsible for identifying and approving policies and procedures that guide the coordinated entry system in King County. The King County Regional Homelessness Authority staff will be responsible for implementation of those policies. Yeah, let's see. Awesome. Okay, well, Catherine, I will.
The volume's off. I'm not even.
No, it's fine. Catherine, I'll hand it over to you. We'll do a little roll call here.
Thank you.
And get started.
Sounds great. Devin is at a conference. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Noah.
All right, I'm here. Mute button troubles here. Hello, nice to see you.
Eddie.
Here.
Martha. Portia.
Here.
And Dr. Sam.
Here.
Elliot.
Hi, folks.
Kelsey.
Here.
Jaja. Sherry.
Here.
Sherry is here.
Hey, really quick, it looks like Zaza is actually in the attendees.
Oh, okay.
One sec.
And Martha, I see you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was late.
All good. Just promoted Jaja to a panelist. Hi, Jaja.
Hi, my link was not to the panelists. I did not get a panelist link. So I just clicked on the link and I'm like, why can't I get in?
Okay, gotcha. Thanks for letting us know.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep, we have 9 members present, 1 absent. You have met quorum.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. It's so great to see you all and be with you again. Today, before we continue, is it okay for me to present the motion and then I just gotta get someone to second it?
No,
Oh, sorry.
committee member shouldn't make the motion.
Okay.
And this is their language.
Perfect. Okay. So I had created the agenda for us this month. On the agenda at 11:40, I had a vote for us to approve new committee members. I've just received some more applications for committee members this week. And I apologize to everyone. This is my fault. This is on me, but I just haven't had enough time to really go through everyone's applications, get like a second person, one of you, hopefully from the committee to review some of those with me, so that we can select a couple of finalists to bring to vote here. So I apologize. It's on me this time. I'm not ready for us to go through with that today. So if someone could put forth a motion to amend the agenda to strike that piece of the agenda today, I'd be very grateful.
This is Jaja. I'd like to amend the agenda to reflect that we will strike the 1140 entry until a later time. And Tom, I would love to do that with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Right
Jaja.
second, Patricia, Dr. Sam will second to amend the agenda for later.
And we can do a voice vote for this. So all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any discussion? Motion is passed.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Working hard on that, so I'll make sure that we're in a place to get some more folks here to join our committee next month. So thank you for your patience. The next thing that we have on our agenda is we have Daniel Ramos III here from our research and data team. I've asked Daniel to come join us today to give us an update on what KCRHA has been working on with the Coalition Ending Gender-Based Violence for our domestic violence coordinated entry system. So Daniel, I'll kind of pass it over to you to talk a little bit more about what you've been working on with them and the updates that you have for this committee.
Absolutely, yeah. Can I get promoted to panelist and I can share
Totally.
just some bullet points on my screen?
Yep.
And hi, everybody. Can I just get a show of hands, really? Who's been keeping track of the coordinated entry DV or have heard of anything about it? Okay, Kelsey. Kelsey, put your hand out. We know you're rolling in the mud with that. Anybody else, even a nod or any signal? No, okay. This is good. This is a good, this is great. I'm gonna share my screen then. And let's see here. Okay, that's a lot of text. I'm not gonna go through every single bullet point. Oh, hang on. No, okay. I'm not gonna go through every single bullet point and just read it to you. I do wanna have, make this engaging. So if you have questions, I wanna answer them for you. Tom, what's my time?
You have 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay, this is great. So let me get another, just a signal. How many of you were working in this field back in around 2015 when coordinated entry first started? When HUD kind of came out and said, hey, we want to see this thing with very little minimal guidance, no real standards, no real pitch on how it's supposed to look. So each community did this a little differently. So for those of you who remember, it was a lot of consolidating lists and different programs and just coordinated entry history in general. Well, around that time, my understanding, working with the Coalition for Ending Gender-Based Violence, that group opted out of having a coordinated entry system specifically for that population because it just didn't make sense for them. And there was, I think, some concerns about privacy, security, and how that would look. And what I'm bringing to you today is an update that sort of encapsulates in these bullet points how we got to where we are today. And I want to talk about where we are today primarily. So fast forward, coordinated entry developed and evolved. It's at KCRHA. Tom is and the team are managing this now. And we applied at KCRHA for HUD funding to design and implement a coordinated entry system for DV survivors. And for those that don't know what exactly that category means, it's those who are fleeing from DV, stalking, dating violence, and adjacently, those that might be experiencing a form of human trafficking that intersects with that as well. So where we are today, that grant was accepted and it was awarded to the Coalition for Ending Gender-Based Violence. That's Aaliyah and Hannah working over doing this work. And when I came on board as the HMIS lead for KCRHA was to produce a annual performance report for the program. Have any of you done an APR or are familiar with the APR? You heard about this? I see some heads shaking. This is a HUD standard report that you have to produce. So that's when I was brought in. And for the last year, 0.5, we've been working I've been working towards that goal. But in the meantime, this has been an opportunity to do a lot of design work and understanding how the process works for that group. Kelsey, you raised your hand. I don't want to miss an important point. Please feel free to add there if I misstated or.
It was
something.
simply about familiarity with APRs.
Oh, I see. Yes. So that was the goal for me, Daniel, was to get us to produce an APR. Looking at that though, we really needed to provide some technical support here at KCRHA to the coalition to organize around what does a coordinated entry look like for this group. And they were doing this work, they were just doing it outside of the HMIS. So what we learned was they were doing referrals, they were prioritizing these households, much like you see with coordinated entry, just in all of these different ways that weren't standardized. And so after working with the coalition, working with this committee, System Performance Committee and the COC Advisory Board, we got to a place to vote that we wanted to, and it was approved to do this and configure this in the HMIS. Stop there for questions. No questions so far.
See any hands?
Anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
I have a quick question.
Oh.
This is Dr. Sam. This handout, background content, is this available for us? I'm trying to follow through. It's a little hard to read. Will you be able to share this with us, with the group, at some other later
Yeah.
after the meeting?
I can
Okay.
get these bullet
To
points.
read through it. Because the information is new to me and I would like to be able to read through it.
I see. Yeah, well, I'll make this available for you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Absolutely. Trying to make it a little bit more easier on the eyes. Sorry.
If you send it to me, I can send it.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you, Catherine. Catherine will send it out to you all. So as you can imagine, building a coordinated entry system in the HMIS takes a lot of careful consideration because of the vulnerability of this population and all the safeguards. So there are two major federal pieces of regulation. That is the Violence Against Women Act. And then the Department of Justice has guidelines for victims of domestic violence and those who are experiencing human trafficking. That's just important to note that we have a lot of regulations here is what I want to just characterize here for you. So we've been navigating that with HUD, with Kelsey, with Tom, and with the coalition. And where we're at today is that we've got a configuration approved at all those levels. We have a scope of work, a service agreement, and our HMIS software admin team is going to project manage and get that configured in the system. And it's going to look somewhat like coordinated entry, or mainstream coordinated entry, if you will, with referrals and prioritization assessments. That's all being fleshed out by the coalition, and they're working with all of their partners to figure out what those assessments and how to prioritize. And Tom's doing a wonderful job of informing on what the rules are for prioritization, what you can and cannot prioritize. And we're helping to navigate all of that with them. We also, with the help of Kelsey, found a funding source. So we paid for that scope of work, which is excellent. So we've really got all the pieces converging together. We've got a design, we've got funding, we've navigated the regulations, and now it's just rolling up our sleeves and getting that built out and put into the system. Where we are today on that is looking at things like policies and procedures that need to get updated so that there's guardrails and those practices are set. So I'm looking right now at what we have for the current coordinated entry system with Tom, and what can we reuse and what do we need to make that's unique to the DV population there. The other thing, and this is something I highly recommended to the coalition, is they actually be a part of this group. so that they can give updates on straight from them. And that they can elevate the population and the voices of their constituents so that you all can strategize around, homeless services, not just for the broader community, but for this specific population as well. And I think that does two things. One, we may need to strategize on how we're going to maintain funding year after year. So we want to start that conversation early. And two, evaluations that you're doing right now on coordinated entry. We're going to want to do those for the coordinated entry for DV survivors as well. So we can optimize that system and make improvements year after year. And I think just linking up with the coalition and bringing them to this group is going to be a huge benefit for just everybody in the community. Because I think everyone is serving victims of domestic violence. This is really going to start to transform that into having a set of expertise in doing that using HMIS. And they're going to need a lot of support because the coalition has not used HMIS in this way. All of you have that experience as peers and leaders in this space to bring your minds to bear on maybe some solutions that they're trying to solve for that aren't technical solutions, which is what our team at Research and Data bring, but maybe other sort of processes or business rules that you could help advise on. And I'll stop there too for questions. Are there any thoughts or any feedback there?
Thanks, Daniel. Jaja, I see your hands up.
Yeah, Daniel, with the new administration and the DEI and all that, with the genders and all that, this is not affected, am I correct?
No, with the help of with the craftiness of Kelsey, we got all of this scoped out to the extent possible at the end of last year, and the budget was from last year, so this is already prepaid. And because we are part of the state's instance of HMIS, we got a deep discount, and we have a legacy provision that allows us to have as many user licenses as we want.
Second question, Daniel. And so I seen in 15 it didn't pass, but in 23 it did. But I remember sitting on coordinated entry when it was introduced and we voted on it. I believe it's because there's something embedded to keep the safety of the people fleeing separate from, like, just not everybody can see their information. Am I correct?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that configuration.
Okay.
So it's a completely walled off environment within the HMIS. So nobody but victim service providers are going to have access to it. So that follows the intent of the law. They're going to be de-identified, meaning there is going to be no names of individuals in the system, another layer of protection for them. And we here in Washington State, we are if you will, we are the only state that has an opt-in law, meaning if you want to be in the HMIS, you have to explicitly say, I want to be in. So it's going to be consent at the individual household level. Every other state, you can put them in the HMIS and they have to request to be out of it. While in Washington, they have to request to be in it. So I think those are three very strong layers of protection, as well as access roles, which I'll work with you on, Tom. We'll work together on that. It's a need to know. So who needs to see it? We'll have all of that documented, who has access, so that we can control that very carefully. And I am the HMIS security officer for the organization at KCRHA. So it is incumbent on me to make sure if there is any vulnerabilities, if there is any kind of a risk, that I'm aware of that, and that if there is something that were to happen, that we quickly assemble and respond to that. So that is top of mind for our team as well. Good
Thank
question.
you so much.
What else? This is exciting. We're going to have a line of sight on how this is functioning.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to see how prioritization is happening. We're going to be able to look at equity, We're gonna be able to elevate the voices of those who are experiencing violence and need housing in ways that we haven't before.
Yeah, and I think also too, another huge thing that I think of about this is seeing where the gaps are in our programming. You know, what through monitoring with some of the metrics that we'll be using in HMIS, it's kind of like, what are we hearing from the community? What type of programs are we seeing that are highly sought after? And then what are we seeing, what are we not seeing? And so how can we use that to impact when we're, you know, applying for dollars, you know, for like what we're gonna need in the future for the CMC, so.
To that point, Tom, excellent point. We're gonna see the inventory. Probably the most important asset we have in this work that we do. We're gonna know the beds and the units that are available for this group.
Daniel, Portia would like to know if you mentioned a timeline for implementation.
We have a nice long runway for this. We have a year to build this out, and we're gonna be implementing it in 2026. At the start of 2026. So, and we have a little bit of time even then if we find ourselves that we need to more thoughtfully figure out some pieces and really the business rules of it on how they're using the system, not necessarily the technical infrastructure.
Thanks, Daniel. Jaja, I see your hands up, then we'll go last question on this one, because then we'll turn the page to our next agenda item here, but go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about the data collecting. Will the data be collected, help to help these folks, you know, move forward in the system and just, you know, so that there's an overall understanding of how important this is?
Yes, we're gonna collect all the standard APR required data, and I can send what that is. We're gonna look at referrals, connections to different supports, demographic information, counts of people, ages. And when the assessments are actually fully done, we might have some other interesting data points. And I think what's really interesting here is we're gonna, you know, these are not just people experiencing domestic violence. These are people with a multiplicity of identities. So we'll be able to see through that frame who is experiencing homelessness, who needs support, and what other groups are they a part of and intersecting with. And you all can, you know, through your networks, help bring in some supports on that, and you know, I think help support this new thing. I think that's the other reason we're here today, is because we need your support on this. Because this is a new team, a new group that's going to be doing this for the first time. They're not going to have made all the mistakes that, you know, we all have to learn. And if we can avoid it, we want to avoid it, especially because how vulnerable this group is. Does that answer that, Jaja?
Yes, and I was especially concerned about the children involved, you know, and making sure that they get the care that's needed.
And right now, we really don't have a line of sight on operations. So there's a little bit of fog there. They're more than willing to tell us and share that, but we're trying to lift that fog. We'll be lifting that fog with this.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Portia.
Do I have time for one quick question? I know we're about ready to go to the next agenda item.
Please, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm curious right now with DVCHAP and then HMIS, or like coordinated entry referrals. I know they, you know, are operating separately. I expect from my team, just as they hear about this, they're going to ask, will those overlap once it's operating in a parallel system? I know sometimes right now we have people like processing for DVCHAP resources at the same time that they're processing for coordinated entry resources. Do you have any insight into how that might overlap?
I think that's what I'm here to, I think the ask is here is kind of commission those doing the work on helping with solving some of those business,
Okay.
those goals and business processes, as I call them. But really like, yeah, what is gonna be the circuitry and the overlap and the distinction? And already we have people who overlap
Right?
Yeah.
in the work, so
Right.
it adds complexity and I don't have a great answer for you. I don't know.
I think too, I think excellent, like really important and excellent question, Portia. And I think too, part of a step to have the material to answer the question is like taking this step so that we can see, how much overlap is even happening and that's, I mean, there's lots to tease out there with like de-identification and kind of like, who has a profile in like mainstream HMIS and who, so there's lots there, but that's a really important and good question.
And Kelsey also, Catherine, if you two wanna help answer that. I've seen coordinated entry as an iterative process. I mean, started out as a bicycle, went to a sedan. I think, I don't know if we quite have the Cadillac yet, but I think it's on the factory floor. So I imagine, the first year, second year, we're gonna see improvements as we document, gaps here and there. But Catherine, Kelsey, anything on that piece?
Kelsey had to hop because she went to a meeting, but
I don't.
Kelsey will be back at 11, so. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Daniel. Yeah,
And may I be dismissed?
please,
No, you have to
yes.
stay for the entire meeting. And will you send me what you want me to send?
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel, for all the work on this.
Yeah, seriously. Shout out to Daniel for all the work on it, the rest of
Coalition.
Daniel's team, and also to
Coalition, yeah.
the Coalition Ending Gender-Based Violence. Hannah Whitworth has been super involved and like tenacious and really doing a lot with us to work on this. And then Leah on our team has, from a coordinated entry perspective, has really kind of like project managed and worked a lot with Daniel, Catherine, Hannah from CEGBV. So yeah, thank you all.
I think I don't want the last word, but it might be that they're trusting us. And this is, a fragile baby bird and we need to take great care.
Yeah,
And it's gonna take all of us to do that. So thank you all in advance for, embarking on this with us and giving me time to give an update.
awesome.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Daniel.
Bye, guys.
See you next time. Daniel is also our staffing. Daniel is like my equivalent staffing manager for the coordinated entry committee, like sibling COC work group, the system development committee. That is kind of like the work group that the COC board has working for it for HMIS governance. So this group's for like the coordinated entry governance, SPCs for the HMIS governance, and Daniel's my counterpart with that committee too. So someone who hopefully we'll be hearing from regularly with this group as we all kind of like work together on our stuff. So alrighty, moving right along. I have a presentation for you all. I think the meeting before last, when we were working to identify our kind of goals for the year, goals and objectives, we had a lot of requests for data. And so our research and data team's working really hard to amalgamate our data for basically like our coordinated entry system performance data from the 2024 calendar year. Let's see, I want to do this. Is everyone able to see this PowerPoint presentation screen now? Yep, all right, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So our research and data team is working hard to amalgamate our system performance data, coordinated entry system performance data from the 2024 calendar year. When I have been talking with them, taking the recommendations you all made to me about what you'd like to see, thinking about key performance metrics and the types of data that we displayed on our website when we had an up-to-date coordinated entry performance dashboard on the KCRHA website, so as not to reinvent the wheel. I thought about this, and also taking into consideration how our current case conferencing landscape works. I think of our coordinated entry data almost in a little bit of two kinds of ways. We have our kind of macro, like I say, coordinated entry system performance data. And those are the metrics when we're talking about how many folks are enrolled in coordinated entry, how many folks receive an assessment as part of their enrollment to coordinated entry, how many folks are, referred to a resource, how long it takes between their enrollment and assessment to when they are referred to a resource, how long does it take from when they're referred to a resource to when they actually move in, the demographics that are associated with all those kinds of timelines, those things that you all are asking about and our previous dashboards, on our website would display. I think of that as the coordinated entry system performance data. Something else that we have now, because of how our case conferencing currently works, is what I refer to as our case conferencing performance data. So this is kind of like a little bit more zoomed in. What is going on in this, what Alex called the dynamic prioritization that came about in about April of 2023 when we shifted to using Smartsheet for nominations, tie breaking no longer with the COVID prioritization, and having resources posted on this daily cadence where we post resources based by population every single day, and housing navigators are nominating their clients using this Smartsheet form every single day, and we're having a case conferencing office hour daily. What is how is that system within our coordinated entry system performing? So here is this is a more macro snapshot. This is not for the entire 2024 calendar year. This is a snapshot of between May of 2024 to April of 2025. And so this is kind of like an update from some of the data that Beth was able to share with you all about a year ago, from April 23 to April 24. So here's some kind of big picture numbers of what we have. We have about 6,500 households that were enrolled in the coordinated entry system program. So an important thing to understand is that this is not necessarily everyone who received an assessment, and our assessment being the housing triage tool. These are households, unique households that were enrolled in the coordinated entry system program on HMIS. So there are 6,491 households. In that time, of all the households enrolled in the CESP, that's what I refer to as the coordinated entry system program, 4,041 households were nominated to a resource. Of those 4,000, and this nomination takes place in this daily dynamic process we have where a housing navigator, a case manager, someone who is very likely a coordinated entry assessor, is filling out the Smartsheet nomination form in the window of time that we have on a daily basis per population. So families in the morning, single adult is smack dab in the middle of the day between noon and 3, and youth and young adult is in the afternoon. A caveat here is that veterans, it still happens on actually that that weekly cadence. So veterans is the outlier in this. Veterans case conferencing still takes place on a weekly basis, not on the daily dynamic cadence like family, youth, and single adult. So there are 4,041 households nominated to a resource last year. Of those 4,000, about 4,000 households nominated, 1,682 were referred to a resource. And then of those 1,682 referrals, 1,139 actually enrolled in the program to which they were referred. I'm gonna ask, actually, I should have said this a little bit when I started the show. I'll ask if we hold questions to the end of the presentation. Because I'm sure that going through this now that you all have a chance to see this, I'm sure the neurons are firing with ideas and questions of things to ask. And let's just wait till the end so we can make sure that we get through it all here. But I left us a good amount of time, so we have until 11 to talk about all this. So here are some demographics, and this is important to distinguish that these demographics are the demographics of these 4,000 nominated households. This demographic table is not the demographics of not necessarily, sorry, no, I flubbed that. Willy Wonka, strike that, go back. These are the demographics of this flow. Sorry, I apologize. So this is in the same time period as we go through all these numbers, these are the demographics for those numbers. And what we see is similar to what we had seen last year, which is parity remains pretty good from enrollment in the coordinated entry system program. That's what we're saying is accessed coordinated entry. They were enrolled in the CESP by an assessor. Those who were nominated for a resource, those who were referred to a resource, and enrolled. So these percentages here are the percentages of those figures: 6,500 accessed, about 4,000 nominated, about 1,600 referred, and about 1,100 enrolled. And it's similar to what we see last year, where the parity remains the same. Something that stands out to me is that the percentage of white folks who are nominated to a resource goes up from the percentage of those who access the system. And it actually goes down 1%, but it does decrease for Black or African American folks. But by and large, the parity remains similar from phase to phase. The other thing that that stands out to me when I look at these numbers is that these percentages, while the parity remains from phase to phase, these percentages are not consistent with what we know from our PIT count as representative of the community of people experiencing homelessness. So we know from our PIT count, and forgive me because I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but we know that like 36% of the households in King County who are experiencing homelessness are not, that these representations and proportions are not consistent with the actual representation of the community of people experiencing homelessness in King County. Okay, this is what I was meaning to say, is just this data here is data that comes just from the Smartsheet nomination process that we have, that daily Smartsheet nomination process. So the other important thing to know with this too is that this data is just in the last 90 days until April 7th. So this is January, first week of January through first week of April. the data that we're getting from all of the housing navigators and case managers and coordinated entry assessors who are nominating the households they're working with to housing. So in 90 days between January 25 to April 25, there were 16,174 nominations made to housing. Of those 16,000, 2,180 were unique households. So that's important to understand, is that there's not 16,000 individual people who were nominated in this time. It's 2,180 unique households that were nominated, but many of them were nominated multiple times. And so that's how you get to this 16,000 number. In this time period, 455 referrals were made. So of the 2,180 unique households, there's only 455 referrals made. So that means that there's like over 1,500 people who were nominated to a resource that did not get a referral to a housing resource. A couple of really important things to note from these figures, both this kind of like case conferencing, like smart sheet data, and then also the kind of like macro coordinated entry system data, is that if we look at this number here, 455 referrals made, and then similar to here that there were about 1,139 households enrolled. This means that so between May 24 and April 25, 1,139 households were enrolled in a program opening, because that's the number of program openings that existed during that time frame. Right? And then if we go here and we see there were 455 referrals made, that means that there were only 455 program openings, units, available in that time frame. So there was a referral that was sent for every single unit that was open between January 25 and April 25. But as you can see, there's a really steep drop off there. So, 2,180 unique households, and then for essentially 455 units. This is really kind of the heart and soul of what I call the case conferencing performance data. So this is again aggregated from our smart sheets data between January 25 and April 25. These are not the program referral denials. These are the nomination denials. So the reasons why someone who nominated a household to a resource, why that nomination did not result in a referral to the program. And so this is aggregated from these 16,174 nominations. So reasons why any of those 16,000 nominations did not result in a referral could have been for an inappropriate service match. We see a lot here, 223 denials because of inappropriate service match. So what this is meaning is coordinated entry staff who are tie breaking the nominations are looking at the data in HMIS in someone's housing needs form, in their enrollment data. Does the service match, does the data about someone's service needs match what the program is setting forth as what is an eligible referral? And so we see 223 in the last 90 days were denied because that data is not there. As we know, our current tie-breaking schema starts first with length of time homeless. So what we're seeing is there were 56 nomination denials because on the smart sheet form, we ask the case manager, housing navigator, CE assessor to put on the form what is this person's start of their current episode of homelessness? And 56 nominations in the last 90 days were declined because the data which someone put in the smart sheet, my team was not able to validate in HMIS. They're not going into the enrollment form and seeing that when someone was enrolled in coordinated entry, that their current or prior living situation matches up with what their episode of homelessness is saying, or they're looking at someone's program history and saying, this case manager submitted a nomination and said that, for example, this is anecdotal, hypothetical example, but this case manager Tom is saying that he's working with, Derek, and is saying that Derek's current episode of homelessness started in March of 2014. But when I go into their HMIS profile, I'm only seeing HMIS enrollment starting, 4 months ago, and their prior living situation history is saying that up until, 2 months ago, they were couch surfing. So we're not able to get that data to validate that someone's episode of chronic homelessness is going back 11 years, right? That's what that means. We saw 11 folks who were nominated for a resource by a case manager, and they were nominated and they weren't even enrolled in the coordinated entry system program. We can't process a nomination for someone if they don't have the requisite enrollments and assessments that we need in order to make those appropriate service matches. And then, as you can see here, this massive number, 13,000, are people who just did not receive a referral. This means that there were 13,000 people that a specialist on my team did not even look at their profile. And the reason why is because we were already able to find a match for the resource, an appropriate, from what we can see in our HMIS data, eligible and document ready match for the resource before we even get to, so if I have one resource available and I receive 30 nominations for it, and I'm able to find a match for it in the first 5, well, then there's 25 people who are going to get this. I've already found a match for the resource, so I can't go through and continue to look at the rest of the 25 people's profile. So that's why you get this large number here, 13,109. Over here in the staff nominating frequency, so 74% of people who submit a nomination for a household submit between 0 or 1 and 49 nominations. 14% submit between 50 and 99 nominations. 9%, so 9% of caseworkers are spending time in the last 90 days, January through April, submitted between 100 and 399 nominations, and 3% of the staff who submit nominations submitted between 400 and 600 nominations between January to April. And so, as you can imagine, and a piece of feedback that my team hears from the community of housing navigators frequently is they're spending a lot of time filling out these smart sheet forms and, working with their people on this daily cascading dynamic cadence to submit nominations. So, 74% submit, 0 through 49, that's still a large swath. So you could, the bulk, the super majority of staff between January and April submitted anywhere between 1 and 49 nominations, which is still not nothing. But as we see here, 14 plus 9 is 23, 26%. So a quarter of the staff who are submitting nominations are submitting anywhere between 50 in the last 90 days to 600, which is a huge number. They're spending a lot of time, doing this work. So I want to give that, make sure that they're seen in that and give them a shout out to that too. Tie breaking. So for the nominations that are submitted, if I'm a case manager, and I've submitted, any number of these nominations, the percentage of nominators who have had nobody on their caseload ever get referred to a resource is 54%. 38% of nominators in the last 90 days had between 1 and 5 of the people that they've nominated get referred to a resource. 6% had 6 through 10 of their nominations turn into a referral, and only 1%. So here are some like really superstar case managers who in the last 90 days were able to secure between 11 and 15 referrals for their households that they're working with. And that is all of that data. We're at about 10:57. I think that what we can do is, since we struck another 20-minute chunk from the agenda, I think it's okay if we bleed over a little bit of time in here, and this is an important conversation. So yeah, Jaja, your hand is up.
Yeah, I want to say, so because I'm not a provider or work for direct service, is it first come, first serve is why, like you were making the example that here is what we have in the pot for referrals, and the second person out of the 5 met that referral, so they get it, right?
Yep.
And so is it first come, first serve, or how do you figure out who's 1 and who's 5 in that slice of pie? You know what
Yes,
I'm saying?
great question, Jaja. That's where the tie-breaking schema that we have right now comes in. So we have our smart sheet. Here. I do this when I was a single adult specialist. I'd do this in my case conferencing meetings regularly.
Are you going to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm about to share it. I'm sorry. Thank you for bearing with me.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
And I also want to just end with, if there's not enough housing, evidently.
Yeah.
That's what the bottom line is, right? There's not enough housing.
Yes.
And hurrah to those folks who are taking the time to go through each one of these to figure it out.
Right. So for example, like this is a smart sheet form, and that's a smart sheet form, and you can see there, and it's all like organized, like our smart sheet organizes it by top to bottom of like the length of time, the date of homelessness that the nominator put on the sheet. So it starts with the person at the top is going to have like the most number of days.
So that answered my question. It's the person who's homeless the longest that get priority.
Exactly. But as reported by their caseworker. And so
right, with the information given, right?
And then we have to validate, and then we have to validate that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so we start there. So we start by, okay, Tom UI is at the top. I open up the profile and it's saying that, Tom's been in his current episode of homelessness since March 2014. I sift through the profile to validate that. And then I go from there. If everything checks out, then I'm not even going to the next 2 strata of like the tie-breaking schema, unless there's someone else that has the same date of homelessness as me. If that's the case, then that's when we go to okay, which household is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence? And if both are or both are not, that's when we then go to, okay, which household is sheltered or unsheltered? But from there, if usually we're able to determine that just based off of the length of time. And then, so that's when we go to the HMIS profile, the housing needs form, the coordinated entry enrollment, program enrollment data. Is it in this person's, this is a unit of permanent supportive housing in the single adult space. The person needs to have a qualifying disability, they need to be chronically homeless, et cetera. Am I getting from the housing needs form and the enrollment data that they do live with a qualifying disability, that they are chronically homeless, that they've indicated in their housing needs form that they are an appropriate service match for permanent supportive housing? Does it say that they're an appropriate service match for rapid rehousing? I'm then gonna have some questions about that. As a specialist, I might call that case manager and say, hey, looking at this housing needs form, I'm seeing you say they're a match for PSH and RRH. Those are two really different program types. Can you tell me a little bit more about this person? And also too, that's all the work that, that the team here is doing to kind of to siphon through all those things. So does that answer your question, Jaja?
In depth, thank you.
You're welcome. Eddie.
Hey there. Thank you for getting this information. Quite a few questions. One, can you send this deck to us so we have the information? I mean, besides my chicken scratch notes that I wrote down.
Yeah.
In a hurry. Besides echoing what Zaza just said around there's definitely not enough housing. I mean, that is astonishing that, just in the last 90 days, rough math, each household is getting nominated for 8 different resources. And then of that, it's like a 15% chance that they will get like a referral happens just out of that. That's pretty staggering for our community. Questions I did have though around, like you were talking about the validating the homelessness and the service match and things like that. So when you guys are trying to validate those times, or the length of time homeless or the service match, if you see a discrepancy, are you reaching out to the referring person first, or are you just going with what's in HMIS?
Yeah, so I think frankly, it can depend on population, and it can depend on like our specialist bandwidth. Honestly, am I still sharing my screen?
Yeah, we see the main slide right now, the first slide.
I just want to keep us, I wanted to keep some of the data up. So when you take a population like family or youth and young adult, the number of units available on a day-to-day basis is typically lower than for single adult.
Mm-hmm.
The number of not, so it's the cadence, that daily churn is not as intense on the coordinated entry specialist who's staffing that population. And so that's where we're able to do some follow-up. With single adult, it's best practice, and our specialists do put in their very best effort into making sure that like, hey, I want to reach out and try and see. And also too, we have our kind of like boundaries on what time and resources allow. And also, my staff does a lot of work encouraging the case managers and housing navigators to attend our office hours to ensure that they have all the information that they need to submit those smart sheet nominations appropriately and make sure that the information is in HMIS where it needs to be. Because frankly, the truth is that sometimes on days when there's really a lot of units available and there's lots of tie break, is that they don't have the bandwidth to be able to call every case manager and kind of say, hey, I saw your nomination for this person to this resource. The data isn't exactly where in HMIS to where there's a good alignment here. Can we talk about this? Because then those conversations can become lengthy, everyone wants to, rightly so, everyone wants to advocate for their client to like receive the resource. And so sometimes, in the interest of keeping things moving along, the staff have to say, okay, this HMIS profile is incomplete. I need to move on to the next person.
And I completely understand that, and I get that. I am fearful, though, that somebody might get not selected for a couple of different reasons. One, case manager didn't know that they put something in wrong, like
Right.
based off of information. Maybe there's not data that is in HMIS about the person's homelessness because it just was an instance that wasn't recorded. And so you're not seeing that in there. And so then it's not being counted or being validated. Like, I mean, I get the bandwidth, but that's a little concerning that we're not at least, even if it's after the fact, hey, this person didn't get the nomination because we couldn't do X, Y, and Z. Like,
Right.
maybe it's not a conversation
Oh.
beforehand, so maybe then afterwards it can be a conversation in the days after and they
Yes.
can nominate for something else.
Yes. Well, so Eddie, I'm glad that you said, because that's where something that we incorporated last year was, and the reason why we have this data here about the denial reasons is because we have several different kind of like template emails that will automatically get sent to the housing nominator about like, we were not able to process your nomination into a referral today, and it's because information in the housing needs form was not matching with the service of that unit, right? Like the service match was off, or the information that you indicated about this person's length of time did not align with what we saw in HMIS. That is why we did not process your nomination. So there is a degree of what you're saying, Eddie, of happening is happening through those responses that we send. However,
Is that happening consistently though in the single adult space? I'm not questioning if it is or not. That's a flat out question.
yeah, no, it happens. Yes, that's happening every day. That like a specialist is looking through, and when they need to move on from one person in the smart sheet to the next, they're clicking that box of saying, this is not an appropriate service match. And when they click the box in the smart sheet, it sends a message to the email of the.
So it's an automated process.
Yes.
Okay.
The one big caveat with that, though, is that doesn't cover the 13,000 nominations that maybe the data is stellar in HMIS, maybe the information is stellar, or maybe it's not. But we don't even know because we didn't even look at that person's HMIS profile because we found a match before we even looked at the rest of those nominations, right?
Right. And I think a lot of us, we tell the people that do these, I mean, if you don't hear from somebody, that means nothing happened. I mean,
Right.
so it's like, it's just more of like, if somebody is skipped over, that's I think is the bigger thing, is like, if somebody is skipped over, like I want to make sure that they have a chance to address that and correct it.
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's, I mean, 300 people that didn't receive a referral just in the last 90 days for various different reasons, and not all resources come up all the time. And maybe there is something that was a very particular
Right.
resource that was a good match for that person.
Right. Yes. Martha.
I want to thank Jaja for keeping the lack of housing in the forefront of the conversation. And agree with what Eddie was saying. I was curious if there will be an opportunity in the future to find out more specifics about why the service match did not seem to happen. The top reason for denial on
Right.
what you were just showing. Yeah, curious what that looks like, and in what ways people are not a match. And then also just in terms of all of the staff referrals, all the referrals that don't even get looked at, just because there are too many. All of the tie breaking and placements, as you were saying, your staff are limited in terms of time, as are everybody in the community. And all of that all of these referrals do take a lot of time. So I know we've been talking a lot in this committee just about how to build in efficiencies. And to Eddie's point, like if we know if someone's getting denied and why, then we can work on that, as opposed to like keep referring them over and over and over again for the same unit.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think too, Martha, going off of that, and then also just kind of like Eddie's also point about kind of like, hey, hey, we understand that the team doesn't have time to call and really follow up with everyone, but to me, I just want to say like, I want to try and keep like my own like coordinated entry manager opinions, like not make them like super strong. But I would just say that I agree with you both about how I think the idea behind this system has to do with ensuring that there's speed in the process for making sure that when a unit, if someone isn't eligible or if someone doesn't have their documents ready for a unit, and that unit has to go back to case conferencing because the referral gets denied, that happens the next day. And then not only does that happen the next day, but that there's this kind of ease of access, right? The idea is that we're not going to ask you to show up here at the Yesler building in person to sit around the table and do case conferencing like when I was a housing navigator, it used to happen at the Chinook building, that you can do it from your tablet if you're in the field, or you can do it from your computer at the shelter program at which you're working. And I understand that. So there's this thing where it's kind of in the name of like opening up access and also in like speed. But I also think that there's a lot to be desired in terms of like in transparency. And I also think too that having kind of an automated process with this tie-breaking schema where people on my team are being asked to look for things that are checking certain boxes in terms of this tie-breaking schema, and then make sure that data in HMIS is where it needs to be, and then sending a referral. That coordinated entry is owning the coordinated entry team is owning a piece of that process and really kind of like deciding who gets a referral. That didn't used to be the case when this was a little bit more of a community-led process in previous iterations, right? Like the coordinating entity facilitated the case conferencing space, but we did not necessarily make the choice of who was getting the resource. The community of providers, the people who are at the table to do case conferencing work were helping to make that determination. And so if there's feedback and if there's issues, then that can be a community conversation of, well, how are we making how are we making these decisions as a community together, rather than this kind of like, kind of really, frankly, like systematized, like we're throwing 16 and forgive my, kind of flip in terms of this here, but these are human beings, right? And it's kind of like this system is kind of doing this thing where it's like, let's throw 16,000 pieces of spaghetti at the wall and hope that 455 stick, and it's not, yeah. So I'll have it there, but maybe you can see a little bit of how I feel about this too, as we're talking about it. Jaja.
Yeah, I won't belabor this, but I'm not, like I said, a direct service provider, but I'm hearing direct service providers speak in this space. And I'm hearing you speak. And the bottom line is the housing. There's not enough. There is
Right.
just not enough housing. And what can we do as coordinated entry or the RHA to remedy that? I mean, are we looking at ways to do that? Because it sounds, what I'm hearing is frustration on the direct service provider's part, where they keep referring someone to all the, maybe to 8 different spaces that they're eligible for, and they all get shot down. That must be, that's like frustrating, not only for the direct service provider, but coming out of homelessness myself and waiting on the list, but that was VSPAD at the time, but still waiting, right? And I didn't have any idea of any of this stuff was going on, and how
Right.
frustrating, it is sitting in a tent, wondering, and people keep telling me, my provider, my case manager telling
I'm
me,
nominating
yeah,
you every
it's
day.
good, it's good, and then only to be shot down over and over again. That's
So-
frustrating as heck.
So Jaja, that is a really important point. And thank you for re-elevating that back again, because another thing that I was thinking of as I listened to your all's questions is one thing that I would love to see us talk about in this committee is helping the coordinated entry team, setting some strong language, some strong policy language for the coordinating entity to communicate with the community of housing navigators and housing providers, case managers and CE assessors, that because there is so few housing resources, to do some, what I would call healthy expectation setting. Because I think that one of the things that can weigh, and I don't want to play the little violin for my team and my team members, but because it's hard on all of us, it's hard on every member of this system, whatever point you're entering and participating in. One thing that I see wearing on my team is when it's wearing on the housing navigators, that they're doing that. I've nominated someone 20 times in the last 90 days and they haven't gotten a referral. And Tom, I'm calling on the phone with people who are frustrated and walking with those housing providers and accompanying them in that is really hard. But I think that something that we need to do a better job of is having some strong language about communicating expectations. When I first became a coordinated entry assessor in 2017, and I went through my assessor credential training, I was asked to put a piece of paper on my desk that laid out not only the expectations for privacy around sharing data in HMIS, but also letting people know that the tragic reality is that it is unlikely that you will receive a housing placement through coordinated entry, which can seem like a really negative and horrible thing to say to someone. But I think that it is a healthy and good expectation to set, because from my experience now in the last year and a half being on this team and coming back into the Seattle King County, homeless services landscape, is that to me, it seems that there's a narrative and a kind of tenor of conversation of just enroll in coordinated entry and you can figure out your housing that way. And I think that from the jump is setting up an unrealistic expectation to people where they're thinking, well, I've done my assessment at the regional access point or with my shelter case manager, so it's only a matter of time before I get housed. And as we can see from this data, that's just not true. And so I think that I'd like for us to maybe talk about ways that we can create some strong language in our policies and procedures of doing some of that expectation setting. Because I think that while it's a really tough pill to swallow, I think long-term, Jaja, you're absolutely right. Like, let's talk about the lack of housing resources. And short-term, what can we do to help kind of stop that frustration bleeding, like up front? of getting this data out there and letting people know, like, the reason why you're calling my staff and being like, I've been nominating someone every single day for the last 3 months, what gives? Well, you know, this is the reality.
Yeah, and Tom, on that though, that is the reality, right? But why do you have people working in direct service and even have this available if you're not giving them hope? You know what I'm saying? I mean, realistically, we don't have enough housing. So maybe not so harsh to say that coordinated entry won't get you housed, but check this out. It's only one avenue.
Right.
And so you need to look at several other places
Yes.
because the percentage of you getting housing through coordinated entry is
Is
far
low.
less than you may be putting your hats in very many baskets. See what I'm saying?
I
So
do.
as not just to do the hope. I'm
Yeah.
all about the hope thing, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, I agree with you
Those are,
wholeheartedly, and I appreciate you.
You're 100% right. And those are the conversations that I encourage my staff to have with the community of providers, is to say, don't hang your hat on just this avenue. You know, we need to be exploring all the options that people have. I think, you know, not to take the hope, we got to keep the hope up. And also, I think another harsh reality too is that outside of the coordinated entry system, the options become, they're also few and they're also difficult to navigate. Like they're not systematized. There isn't. So the next question my staff gets from people is, okay, well then where do I go? And the answer is all these kind of disparate, different, you know, a wait list here, a wait list there, these different types of resources. Patricia.
Just a couple of thoughts came to mind, questions and so with this HMIS system and the documentation, say you're on the front line, you have the client's housing, say, example, permanent supportive housing. Then are they, the case managers' expectation, are they supposed to be updating information
Yes.
into the system regarding the folks that are on their caseload? A good example, and okay, so I heard a yes. And then say if you have clients that I moved in, there's some challenges, things like that, they may have changed case manager, and or there was no actual clinical case management going on, so they have like other case manager under a different agency. How do they, and they're requesting follow up on, I have some grievances. I grieve, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And I heard someone say you can go to but the client is trying to do this on their own. And I'm trying to figure out who is held accountable to helping our most vulnerable, marginalized people navigate the system when they're in, instead of feeling like they're getting penalized and,
Right.
oh, you are a threat for losing your housing.
Right.
And then the case manager just kind of like disassociates with them. And there's some safety concerns. And then the other piece to that quickly is that they're requesting a mobility. So wouldn't that be under the case manager that is working with them to help them navigate that mobility process and engage whoever else in coordinated entry to support? Those are just some concerns, things that I'm facing when I talk to some clients.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple different pieces there. The whole mobility request thing, that's another topic that this group had asked to talk about. So I'm gonna focus primarily on just what you were saying about, so there's an expectation, and this is another thing that is we talk about in the assessor credential training and also our daily, case conferencing office hours, is letting staff people know, right? Because as someone who was a coordinated entry assessor and a housing navigator, is if I have my initial conversation with someone on my caseload and I ask them a set of questions the first week that I meet them, and then I go about, you know, the good hard work of developing trusting relationship and rapport with that person, and then come to find out a month, 2.5 months, 3 months later that actually there's realities about this person's situation and their needs and everything that maybe they weren't comfortable telling me about at first, but I learned more that it is our expectation that they are capturing that and updating those forms in HMIS to make sure that's all in there. So we talk with folks about that. Yes, and then Dr. Sam, you're right about the Ombuds office, is that, you know, there's in our policies and procedures too, coordinated entry does have, you know, we have a grievance policy. So that's something else that maybe this committee should look at and kind of talk about how do we make sure that that's something that is very well marketed and out there. Yep, thank you. And so this is all really wonderful conversation. Catherine's let me know it is almost 11:30. We do have a couple more things that I wanted to take us through here. Stop sharing my screen. But yeah, thanks everybody for your thoughtful comments and participation in that conversation. More to come, more data to come. I think the system, the coordinated entry system performance data at large is going to be a huge thing for us to talk about. Yeah, and I think that all this kind of stuff is exactly what we do need to be talking about so that we can come together and start to make some chart some courses and make some decisions about how we want to improve the efficiency and kind of performance of this system. So to that end, actually, the next thing that I wanted to talk with you all about today are the population-based leadership teams that are part of coordinated entry. So in the most recent edition of our coordinated entry policies and procedures, it says that the coordinating entity, which is the coordinated entry team here at KCRHA, is responsible for designing and executing ongoing quality control activities to ensure clarity, transparency, and consistency in order to remain accountable to households, referral sources, and homeless service providers throughout the coordinated access process. And in the past, we have had, and actually still currently, so for veterans, there is what is called, well, what used to be called the Veterans Operational Leadership Team, which is really a coalition of VA providers, King County, funded direct service programs that are enrolling folks in coordinated entry, the veterans, housing, rapid rehousing providers and DASH providers, all these different providers coming together to talk about what are the trends we're noticing, what are the goals and objectives we have for our case conferencing space. I think they have a great model. They like to think of it as the weekly case conferencing meeting is kind of the micro level. I say micro just in terms of scope, not necessarily to underscore importance. The really important work of the client level, making referrals and doing the nominating for units and tie breaking and everything. And then the macro kind of, what are the overall trends that we're seeing from our case conferencing, and they bring a group together to talk about that. We've had groups like that in the past for other populations, for single adult, for youth and young adult, and for family. And I think one of the unfortunate legacies of the pandemic and the at the time necessary but cumbersome social distancing was that it was hard to maintain the inertia behind keeping those groups together. And so in the last couple of years, since I've been involved with, the coordinated entry team, that presence has not been as strong. And so it's been a huge goal of mine over the last 6 months in my time here to bring those groups back together, because I see them as a vital piece of this, the ongoing quality controls, and kind of having supervisors, input from direct level staff, program managers, having conversations similar to what the conversations that we're having here, and keeping that healthy and robust kind of case conferencing patterns going. And so I just wanted to let you all know that I've begun to reach out to leaders and members of the different, population-based provider teams, whether they be on the housing navigation side or the housing program side itself, to convene meetings to say, hey, let's bring you all back in again closer. This isn't just KCRHA's coordinated entry system. This is the community's coordinated entry system. This is all of your coordinated entry system too. So I just wanted to let you all know that that's something that I'm working on, and kind of bringing in that community level support. I talked a little bit about this at I attended another COC work group that's taking place right now, is the Charter Revision Committee work group that's happening to review and amend the COC charter. And I talked a little bit about this with that group there. They had a great question for me, which was, Tom, it's great that you want to make sure that you're getting community input and community voice for, continuous improvement and quality control from providers. But where is that voice coming in from, the folks experiencing homelessness who are also using this system as well? And so I also think that that's a huge piece that, one step at a time, it's kind of like, I'd like to get the providers back in. And then also with those groups, hopefully we can talk about what are some surveys, what are some, public comment forums that we can have to get also, for lack of a better term, kind of consumer advisory feedback as well, from the community of folks who are using the system. So any questions about that? I just wanted to update you all and let you all know that that's something that I'm working on. Any comments or questions or even suggestions for me as I kind of work through this process? Jaja.
Yeah, Tom, I just appreciate you bringing us in the loop about that. It is more than just RHA's coordinated entry. It is the community's coordinated entry, and we have to quit siloing and work together as a whole to get this. I mean, we already know we don't have enough housing, right? But so we need to pull everybody's resources together so we can figure this thing out. And that's my comment. Thank you for doing that.
Of course. I also want to be very clear too, that in our coordinated entry policies and procedures, it's laid out that the population-based leadership teams are not groups that will come together to change or iterate, coordinated entry policy. That's this committee, this group here, that is your all job. So the way that I kind of think of this is, when we get this evaluative coordinated entry system performance data down, I am updating you all, at least on like a quarterly basis, like a 90 to 120 days. So that's not at least, but 90 to 120 day basis of kind of like, what are the numbers? What's the data telling us about how the system's performing? We are having these conversations in terms of what are the gaps or what are the elements of this that we need to uplift that are improving the efficacy and functionality of this system. And then that kind of overall vision setting and kind of policy and goal setting is what gets taken to my team and the community of providers in these kind of population-based leadership teams to say, hey, we've been looking at the data with the coordinated entry committee. Humor me, this is just a bad example, but just an example. We're seeing that there's not enough or we're seeing that there's so many nominations. Hey, single adult leadership team, what are some things that we can do kind of here immediately in this space with these trends to help improve these types of measures that the coordinated entry committee is asking us to improve, right? And so kind of I see it as like a dynamic, like this committee setting some policy goals, working those out with the community. The community is the way that we can, that my team has the input from the community to do your all's bidding, you know, and really make sure that there's robust community input from that. So that's kind of how I see it. But again, open to suggestions, open to comment.
Tom, I know this is so with the scarcity of resources is what I want to say. And that gap that I had already brought up before in a previous meeting, that I was told that it would be most appropriate in the continuum of care board, about people who can process out of public supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, right? There's that gap and the capacity to move them from PSH to into the current flow, which there's not, you know, very many resources. We already know that. But how can we see, it's like the cog in the wheel that's like kind of stuck, you know? We need to move people out of PSH so those who are eligible for it can get in there. And is that going to be part of coordinated entry once the COC board looks at it? Or where does that go? And where does that fall?
I'm so sorry, Jaja. I think
I'm not sure.
I lost you a little bit there. Can you kind of rephrase the question again, or?
Certainly, not a problem. So would coordinated entry, would this information land back into coordinated entry? What is that information? That information is this. There's a gap in the system in PSH. There's people who sit in PSH who are eligible to move out of PSH to free up room for folks who need to get in there, right? I think I said too much, but basically there's a gap in PSH where there's people who can move from PSH back into mainstream, I guess.
I think of it actually kind of as this way. I think of as PSH is the most readily available resource through the coordinated entry system. It is not the intervention that's most appropriate for every person who's experiencing homelessness, right? It's meant to be the intervention for the highest needs, most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. However, since I think that coordinated entry, since coordinated entry has been around now for a decade, and people who provide homeless services to folks experiencing homelessness are like aware of it as a way to get housing, I think that there's a lot of like square peg round hole kind of like, I'm on like, maybe the person that I'm working with doesn't necessarily need permanent supportive housing to resolve their homelessness situation, but it's what's available through coordinated entry. It's almost the only resource that's available through coordinated entry. So I'm gonna go for it and nominate them for that. And I think that, and Noah had to bow out, he's not here, but I think that, you know, that's when he's been in this space, like that's what he's always saying, is kind of like making sure that we're also really appropriately assessing folks for like what their service need is, and then like being a responsible steward of those permanent supportive housing resources, because the idea behind once someone does enroll in permanent supportive housing is that they don't need to necessarily like to move on. And then also we're kind of getting it right from the start so that there isn't necessarily a need to like mobility transfer people out of PSH who shouldn't have even been there in the first place. Jaja, like I think when I'm hearing what you're saying, and these are huge things that I think we're not going to solve it, but and I also think the other point you're getting to is that like it's going to take all of us in the COC governance structure, the board, the committees, you know, to kind of identify we know what the gaps are, what's causing the gaps, and how do we kind of start to iterate some policy changes to move towards more efficiency with this system.
Thank you. You answered my question because
Sure.
what you're saying, what I heard you say is we need to start at the base, at the beginning. Make sure the assessment is correct. And then we
Right.
won't end up in that situation.
Yes. Okay, so it's 11:40, so I want to keep us moving here to our last agenda item, which is, so we've talked about some data, some coordinated entry system performance data, some case conferencing performance data, this nomination data. One thing that I would like to propose to this group is developing some way similar to what you brought up, Eddie, and what we were talking about is developing some more kind of built out structure to support the coordinated entry assessors and the housing navigators in making these nominations, and to kind of like improve the quality of the nominations to ensure that we're getting good service matches of people who are, you know, ready and able to complete. Because we also know that an important piece of this is when someone gets that referral on the housing provider side, they have their funding requirements and everything like that to ensure that the people that coordinated entry is sending to them have the requisite documentation to submit a housing application and actually move into the resource. So, you know, I was wondering what you all thought today about in the coming months, over the next couple of meetings, talking about ways and incubating ideas that we can support these housing nominators that are doing this. They're doing, like we saw, voluminous work, and also, you know, supporting them to ensure that, like Eddie, you were saying, they're getting that feedback about how their, you know, housing needs forms and enrollment data is entered, and ensuring that they're understanding like eligibility criteria for projects and that the needs forms are matching that. And then also really too, kind of like supporting my team, because that's a lot of work that's for them to like complete all of that feedback and follow up. So I'd just like to propose in the coming months that we maybe focus on that and focus on developing some measures there. What I might kind of call like, you know, some data-driven quality improvement measures for this nomination process. Does anyone have any initial ideas or thoughts or comments about that?
Sides of how important that is. I mean, talking from the experience of a direct service provider and now somebody who processes those referrals, like, I mean, it's not only are we dealing with like clients who are not necessarily document ready, but like there's timelines and like, I mean, it still baffles my mind, and it even did when I was a direct service provider, why somebody would nominate somebody for housing, but yet they haven't even started trying to get their income verification yet.
Yeah.
It's like, especially if they know it's Social Security, because that's not, you
Right.
can't just walk in and they don't have online access. So that could take 2 to 3 weeks to do. And then I know for myself and for Plymouth, like a completed application has to be done within 5 to 10 business days.
Right.
And then we run into extended vacancies, and with us getting pressure now around filling these units within 30 days from WishFic, like we have to provide an explanation. It used to be 90, but now we have to provide an explanation of 30 days or more every time. So
Excuse
yeah,
me, Ed, what do you mean you have to provide
we have to explain why a unit is open longer than 30 days to
okay,
the
gotcha.
state. Yeah. It used to have, we used to only have to do it if it was 90 days, but they changed that. But I
Elliot.
mean, that and the ID part and the social security number part, like there's ways around that. Like, great, we can use an HMIS ID or we can use a provider one printout, things like that. Like there's ways around those requirements, but it's a lot of times they are not document ready or have a plan to be document ready or signing. The other big one is signing disability verifications.
Yeah,
That by a licensed provider. So we send it off to them. They're like, oh, well, they're not connected to anybody. Let me see if they can go to the walk-in clinic. It's like
yeah.
those conversations aren't happening up front, and people get excited because they get a referral, but then it gets pulled out from underneath them.
Right. And talk about just on that point, Elliot, I saw your hand, so I want to make sure you have a chance to ask your question or make a comment. But on that point too, Eddie, it's like we talked about the frustrating and the kind of like process by which people can lose hope of being like, my case manager's telling me they're nominating me for something every day, but I'm not getting a referral. Well, also too, on the back end of that, if they do get a referral, but they haven't prepared those documents up front, and then and kind of what it can do like on an emotional mental health standpoint to someone who's navigating these systems of being like, my case manager told me that I had an apartment to move into, but now I'm getting denied, like why, so I think that's huge. Elliot, was there something you wanted to say or?
I pulled my hand down. I think I'm all right. I was just going to kind of elaborate on what Eddie was talking about with the Finance Commission and review of extended vacancies. But I think I just hearkened, what he is saying, championing just the idea of making sure folks are ready. That's a huge piece. And I think that could maybe be something that would be worth looking at this year with the team is what are we doing, at least for me? I feel like I'm in a unique perspective here, come from a unique place, because I am only representing folks once they're housed and during the application process. I'm not seeking referrals for anybody from homelessness, through the coordinated entry system. We don't do that level of outreach at Plymouth. So, I think on my end, what I'm thinking is, what can we do as landlords to ensure as smooth a process as possible when we're dealing with pretty extensive funding requirements and oftentimes upwards of 5 separate funders asking for 5 separate things in every single building.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think too, like we are the, we're the stem that connects the fruit to the tree, because, the housing navigators are frustrated being like, well, geez, I thought this philosophy was called housing first, not documentation first. Why, and also too, hey, it's hard to work with people who are staying in shelters, living in tents, to like make these appointments, to get to the Social Security Administration, to get to the clinic, to get to the DOL to make sure they have their ID, all that stuff, not discounting that. And we have to, like my team does a lot of currying, like working with the providers to say, like, we understand, we see you, we know that that's really difficult. And at the same time, some empathize with some of these housing providers too, that this is the reality, that they have these requirements, that this is part of the process, so. Jaja, and then we'll move on to kind of talking about topics for next month.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tom, for giving me this space. I know I've talked a lot, but I'm interested in coming together. Like I heard Eddie talk about verifying disabilities, and a lot of people who are unsheltered deal with public health. Have we thought about pulling in the public health? You said the DOL. How can we pull these people into this space in order to alleviate some of that? That's all I'm trying to say, if you get my drift.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. Sherry.
Hi, so I want to make sure that that you have everything, because it's just a little input. I probably should have said this at the beginning, but I didn't know, like, if I should say this here, like on the CA or when I was on the system performance committee. So it just kind of my thought of something, so it might be a little bit off the subject, but I feel like it still kind of ties in. But I just wanted to say that I had experience being unhoused for like a month, and I work and have a job, and it was really hard for me to get the finance to get like help with the moving cost. And then certain agencies could only do a certain amount. And so I feel like that is really a lack in the system. And even with other stuff like help on like energy assistance or other assistance, like there's nothing for us, or I would say folks that do work, and they might make over the amount a little bit, but still are struggling because the economy is hard. And I think that's something to probably look at down the road, because you would think that a lot of agencies would want to help folks that work because that they're going to be able to probably pay their bills, but it seems like that's you. So you know what I'm saying? It seems like that's just I feel like it's kind of hard as well. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, well, would someone like to, if we're comfortable with it, would someone like to make a motion for us to decide to vote whether or not we want to kind of move forward with this process of developing these nomination and quality improvement measures?
I will make that motion.
And I will second that motion. This is Jaja.
Excellent. I forgot what you.
Yep. And you said no, it has left.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, Eddie?
Sorry,
Yes,
what?
we're voting on the motion that was made.
Oh, yes.
Martha?
Yes.
Portia?
Yes.
Patricia?
Yes.
Elliot?
Yes.
Kelsey?
Yes.
Jaja?
Yes.
And Sherry?
Yes.
8 yeses, motion has passed.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks, everybody. So that's gonna be something that we'll definitely talk about next month. And kind of with that, it's 11:54. We have a moment or two. Is there anything that anyone has on their mind that they would like to, in accompanying talking about these quality improvement measures, discuss at next month's meeting?
I'd just like to look at the question and answer where Dorso says, part of the challenge that the COC board can help is prioritizing large size units since there are studios and 1 bedrooms empty in Seattle, King County. I just wanted to highlight that question was there. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thanks, Dorsal. I'm sorry that I missed that in the Q&A. I apologize.
Tom, I'd like to say that this coordinated entry committee meeting was very robust. That I feel like we've gotten to a place where our next meeting will be filled with ideations of how we can improve the system and make it work for us. And thank you for sharing the slides on about your team and what it takes for that nomination process. That seems like a lot. I'm thinking you need to hire more folks and pay, and get them in there to help you out, because that sounds like a lot of work, right? And really frustrating work, but passionate work I just hope that together as a coordinated entry, we cannot, that community that you reach out to will join us, right? And figuring out how to best serve our community and get the work done.
Awesome. Thank you, Jaja. Dr. Sam.
I just want to say thanks. I concur with Jaja. Very informative. Thank you for the thoughts, for sharing the updates, and also thank you, Eddie. I don't know if Eddie's still here, for sharing your experience, what you do. Wow, a lot going on that we don't see, and especially about that getting people document ready. That's one of our tasks here and as a service provider, and it can be really, really challenging. I like the idea where Jaja brought is how can we get some of our other healthcare, service providers together, maybe have some kind of, to help, because right now it's very challenging even for us to help clients get Social Security appointments, let alone calling. Even for just us, sometimes the calls get dropped. Just want to highlight, say thank you for all that. It helped me to get more clarification on what we're doing, and I look forward to that worksheet. And lastly, for our next meeting, I do see it says the meeting is on the 29th, but on our team invite, it says the next meeting is May 22nd. When we are closed, before we close, can we confirm, is it the 4th Thursday or the 5th Thursday?
The 4th Thursday of the month.
It's the 22nd.
Okay, because on the handout, it says the 29th on today's agenda.
That was my mistake. Thank you for your eagle eye and catching that, Patricia.
And
And so in that spirit, since it's 11:58 to adjourn for some next steps, we will share the slides that I presented today with you all.
And Daniel's information.
And Daniel's information. Thank you, Catherine. And we will send out the meeting minutes from today that will have the correct information about the date of next month's meeting. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a great day. Bye all.
Bye-bye.